Hey, well, what's up, guys? Welcome back to the Collision Live. It's me, your host, Daniel, and I'm joined at the desk, as I always am, by the pineapple to my defiled, desecrated piece of pizza, Mr. Samuel David Kemp. What is up?
You know, every Friday night, my wife and I make pineapple bacon pizza, and it's
Monster.
delicious. So good.
Hey, some things God just, his created order, his perfect way. He set things up, and pineapple on pizza definitely is an unbiblical, sinful. Maybe need to check my seminary hermeneutics textbooks, but I feel like the unforgivable sin is probably pineapple on pizza.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll have to see what Wayne Grudem has to say about that.
Yeah, well, hey, what did they say in the ancient Greek about pineapple on pizza? But hey, we're excited to have you join us, whether you're a civilized person that has it without pineapple or whether you're a monster who does it. We are welcoming all of you to another episode of the Collision Live, and it's going to be a good episode. There's a lot of stuff for us to talk about. We're back, for one. We weren't live last week. We were off on various vacations doing different things, so we did a pre-recorded thing. But it's always fun to be live. So I encourage you guys, if you guys are watching, jump into the comment section, have a conversation about this. Except later in the show, we're going to get into like faith-based movies and what does that mean, kind of based on Father Stu and some stuff going on. And there's a lot of other kind of conversations to get into. One thing I thought I would share real quick, that kind of thing that happened in my week that isn't a pop culture story, but it is a meaningful story, that my two 7-year-old twin boys were baptized this last Sunday. Kind of baptized together. They've been kind of preparing for this for really a couple months, kind of going through the training, and kind of both of them on their own spontaneous accord went and prayed to ask for salvation, and say, proud daddy, share some of that.
Personal privilege on the show.
Yeah, hey, it's my show. I can do what I want. Monty does say pineapple was the forbidden fruit. I trust Monty's spiritual opinion and his study of the biblical
why
text.
It tasted so good.
The enticement, yeah. If the fruit wasn't tempting. What about our crew? We have them both back. Joni is back from her crazy pilgrimage into enemy territory on the front lines of Disney, seeing if they really are stealing our kids, and also seeing if it's a small world and trying fun food. How was your trip, Joni?
I mean, Disney was wonderful. It's really a magical place.
It lived up to the hype.
Like 90 out of 100.
Not bad at all.
Hey, I was a little disappointed. I was expecting Joni to come in here with like a goofy hat or some Mickey Mouse ears.
Yeah.
But hey, we'll settle for the hoodie. What about you, Steven? You're also rocking. You guys are coordinated today with your with your Team Disney in the back studio.
I'm doing well. It's been a long week, but no, it's good to be back and live. So, but I'm good.
Yeah, it has been a crazy week. A lot of stuff going on behind the scenes. But hey, it is always fun. I think it's important as Christians just to talk about stuff going on in culture and kind of dialogue about it, to sort of ask good questions. So kind of on that note, let's kick off our show like we always do with some cultural conversations. So why don't we let's jump right into the deep end of the pool.
All right.
Let's go right into the controversy, go into the fire, the scorching heat of Africa. So the Woman King just released, what was it? Was it 2 weeks ago? It all blends together. I was gone for a week.
I think about 2 weeks ago.
About 2 weeks ago, The Woman King hit theaters. If you haven't checked it out, I encourage you, check out our review here at the Collision. I highly enjoyed this movie, one of my favorite movies of the year, actually. But not everyone seems to be as on board with this movie for differing reasons. And because, hey, it's a day of the week, we need something to boycott. Boycott Woman King was trending on Twitter and Facebook and social media. People kind of upset about this movie, and what are people mad about this week?
As someone who is not raving about the film, and it's not my favorite movie of the year, and that's because I haven't seen it, and that's because I really don't go to the theater that often. But it would seem that I think when you try and make a nuanced film about something, the trouble with nuance is the nuance, and so there's some segment of people that are boycotting this film because it essentially kind of whitewashes the tribe that is depicted in this film. These woman warriors, their sort of complicity in the slave trade and they're upset that it's just basically kind of a woke agenda to try and like enforce or fit this square peg of feminism into this circular hole of history, and it's not historically accurate. And so like why is Hollywood making this film? And several of the people involved with the film, including Viola Davis, have come out and sort of defended, hey, we made a movie, and obviously creative license has to be taken. Maybe just calm down a little bit. I don't think she said that, but that was the gist
she
of
meant
it.
that.
Yeah, that's what she meant.
Yeah, because it is the film is set, if you aren't familiar with it, if you didn't see it, the Dahomey people, kind of the kingdom in South Africa. In the movie is sort of their female warriors, which I think were some of the inspiration behind like Wakanda. They're kind of female elite warriors. But in the movie, they're sort of like, they start as part of the slave trade and enslaving their own, and they kind of become like abolitionists, and they kind of free the slaves and burn down the slave places. Well, historically, that is not accurate. They were very involved in the slave trade until really the end and played a big part kind of in that. So that's sort of, I think, where a lot of this tension comes from, is that you're taking sort of people that were very involved in this, and you're kind of like making them very heroic and like elevating them, when like historically that's just not true to history. But I think there's a lot of other reasons, I think, like kind of beneath the surface of like why people are upset about this film, and but it does, I think, raise just the question of like some of these like historical based on a true story, take that for whatever you will. So like, what do you do with these types of films that are like, it's not historically accurate? Even like one of the producers, their response to this whole boycott thing said, it's history, but we have to take license. We have to entertain people. If we just told a history lesson, which we very well could have, it would just be a documentary. So that's kind of his response, saying like, hey, this is just a movie. Like, we're basing it, we're taking some pieces from history, but we're not trying to like tell history. Yeah. Which is essentially the approach of almost every historical epic ever made. I know some do go closer to the source, like, or not the source material, like the historical record, than others. But like, I don't know. Like, is the whole thing this silly? Is there?
Yeah,
is
I
there
mean,
valid?
I think what I can see is if like you're taking maybe historically villains and making them heroes, like I could see maybe that being problematic, which it sounds like that's kind of what they're doing with this film. But at the same time, like, you're gonna have to take it, like any historical movie is gonna be like, they're gonna be taking an angle, and they're gonna like, they can't, again, like it'd be a documentary if they tried to focus on like the full range of what was happening. And so I think it sounds like, having not seen the film myself, it sounds like what they did was try to really focus in on sort of what these women were dealing with, sort of as a reflection of what was happening in the context around them, they themselves being flawed individuals, it sounds like, and just trying to wrestle with some of the more internal versus external struggle. And in doing so, you kind of maybe have to neglect other parts of what's going on. Again, I'm not defending or accusing the movie, but it's like,
it's almost like they like took kind of historical like Lego pieces that were out there, and like then like built like a modern like structure with it. Like, it's like the story itself is very much 2022, and the way we think, and the things that are important to us, and kind of how we wish things had gone back then. And this is sort of using like the names and some of the historical landmarks to like, I guess, to ground it. And again, I think I get the why people are upset about it. And I do think there is, maybe with all like these sort of types of movies, like there is somewhat of like a danger of just like, for most people, they're not going to go do the research. They're going to just base it all on history. And like, we start telling these films that really play fast and loose with history, like you just sort of leave people with a very skewed view of history. Personally, I just don't care. Like, I think like all historical movies like that they're doing that. Like, I don't go to these movies expecting to
historical accuracy.
And kind of like almost like a counterpoint to it is just that I feel like almost no one of like normal people knew anything about this tribe or like the history until this movie came out.
Yeah.
And then they went and researched.
And suddenly there were experts.
And now they're
everywhere.
experts. But it has sort of, even though the movie's fictionalized, like it has brought out the actual history and people talking about it, which wouldn't have happened, I think, had it not been for for the movies. Hey, let us know what you guys think of. Is it something that bothers you? Is it just sort of another example of, hey, we need something culture war, and this is the kind of the flavor of the week? But speaking of kind of culture war and just silly things, kind of our next cultural conversation, based on, of course, as I try and do every week, bring in the Rings of Power somehow, although we're not going to, necessarily get into like the episode and stuff for this one. But there's a picture that was circulating around social media this week, taken from a scene in I think the latest, one of the last 2 episodes.
Yes.
It's a crowd scene. She's giving a rousing speech to these people, and someone out there on the internet took it upon themselves to pause the movie or the show and take a screenshot. And if you're watching our live stream version of this episode, you can see like they kind of circled people, and like you can tell they're like photoshopping in like, this person's gonna also be here, and like so everyone in this crowd makes multiple appearances. Like they're just like flipping them and like using some technological magic to like beef out the cast rather than having to
Pay all those.
pay
people.
all those. It's cheaper just to do it digitally. And again, I think we don't need to get into it because we sort of got into it a couple weeks ago. Like there's absolutely sort of this like agenda, there's like movement to like hate this show. And I think if you just don't like the show, that's fine. But like to pull it into like a culture war thing, and like this is some kind of woke Amazon, and they're defiling the sacred text of Tolkien, and like so there definitely is that. I think that's like what's motivating this. But I think maybe at like a larger, like more general level, like this sort of thing just to me kind of reflects a lot of like just sort of the negative or like the downside of like where we are and like appreciating films or shows. Like, is this?
Yeah,
so,
I mean, this could maybe fall under the column or category of like the negative consequences of streaming, and it's like so now you can kind of go in and go frame by frame, and if somebody's really got a beef with X movie or show, then and you've got loads of time on your hand. Then you can just kind of go in and just pick apart everything and play sort of like Monday night quarterbacking or whatever, where it's like, well, like they did this thing wrong, or and it's like you're mad because they used movie magic to make a movie. It's like, I don't know. It just seems like one of those things. It's like somebody has way too much time on their hands and like maybe a bit of a grudge because they weren't an extra or something. I don't know what ultimately provoked somebody to kind of go in and do some sleuthing.
In some ways, it's sort of like manifestation almost of this more like kind of deconstruction and postmodern of like, rather than just sort of like receiving the story and like for what it is, whether you like it or you don't like it. Like it's almost because you see that all the time with like even just the obsession with like plot holes and like almost just like we're smarter than the any kind of science fiction movie. You always have Twitter, like, actually in space there's no sound or there's no light, or that one. And of like like I saw even for the Rings of Power show, like someone complaining about like the haircut that one of them had. It wasn't accurate to the medieval times that it was supposed to be kind of based on, and like just sort of that. Like I don't know. I think technology, I think social media has also kind of played a part of that, where it's just sort of, I don't know. I think it's good. Social media allows us to connect and like talk about these shows, but like it's also just sort of given rise to this like everything has to be deconstructed and torn apart and nitpicked about things rather than just like.
Well, nothing can be enjoyed anymore. I think that's sort of the stage of society that we're in right now. Like you can't just enjoy a thing. Like somebody somewhere is gonna like do this deconstruction and to some degree and like try and ruin everybody else's day. And the best remedy for that is to just get off social media and enjoy the thing for what it is.
And again, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but like kind of like, at least for me, like, the classic of even like the original Star Wars movie, like the thing that always kind of jumps out to me is like Luke Skywalker goes and like he's never like even been off his planet before. He joins the rebels like. And about like 5 minutes later, they send him an X-wing and like send him off.
And he just knows how to.
He knows what he's doing, and like even like the final run, like his like wingmates who have been like veterans, like are like after you, boss. And, like they're following him, and like they both the Death Star. They get back to like the base, and like there's literally a whole room of guys in like pilot outfits, and it's like so you had a whole room of guys that like stayed at the base, and you sent some like nobody, this farmer that just showed up, and like. It's that sort of stuff that's like, but who cares? Like,
like that's not the point. Like,
it's not going to be an exciting movie. If
haven't you heard of The Force?
Why don't they add like a training sequence or have him just like observe and let like, that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
I think,
where was the training montage?
I think we've sort of lost some of our ability just to like accept and like kind of what films and like art are like trying to communicate, like the emotions, and it's become more of like this like we got to deconstruct everything and find no joy in anything. Say, let us know. Is that silly? Or are you the one that's doing that on social media?
Have you lost your joy?
Have
in
you lost your joy
films?
in watching shows? Well, one thing that Star Wars will be losing is the voice of Darth Vader, or at least in its original form.
The organic
the
voice.
Organic. As I saw one headline now that James Earl Jones is now more machine now than man. So this was announced or shared on social media. I'm sure it's been in the works for quite a while, but James Earl Jones, famously the voice of Mufasa, but also for Darth Vader. I think he's like 91 or 2. Like he's old, so he's definitely he's ready for some retirement. But they kind of there was an article that released 2 days ago, I think, where like they're kind of he signed off basically to let his voice be like used by like the AI algorithm. So like even when he's gone, like Darth
What have
Vader
you
will
done,
still be
James?
with us.
Yeah.
And I don't know. Again, there's lots of things about this story that I think is interesting and I think like, are significant long term. But is this weird? Is it creepy? Is it make sense? Do you?
I mean, I think it makes sense. It is weird and it is creepy, man. I think it's it's sort of all those things mixed into one. I mean, I think it's also sort of the future of entertainment because you've got these iconic voices that you can, I mean, even retroactively go in and because of like AI, you can basically make people who have, say, a lot of airtime, like a lot of recorded audio, you can more or less go in and make them say whatever you want to, and it would be really hard to tell that that was done by AI. And so that obviously raises a lot of like ethical questions, like so who then has the rights to like the AI generated voice of actor X? And so I think it's going to be really fascinating, probably the next 10 years of entertainment, especially as they deal with these sort of like legacy properties, like is Indiana Jones going to live on in
Young, because that is like as I was sort of thinking about this, like in some ways this is like Thanos. It's inevitable. Like you have like the rise of technology, and also it's this rise of like this obsession with nostalgia and like the past, and like not letting go of the things that we grew up with, and like I think you are gonna maybe reach a time when it's like my kids are gonna be like sitting down as adults to watch like the young Han Solo movie or like young Indiana Jones movie, and it's gonna be like a CGI mocaption or whatever, like Harrison Ford, and have his AI voice, and like, in some ways that's kind of cool. Like you can kind of revisit, and some in other ways it's just sort of like I think it's creepy, but also just like
there's a sadness I think to that. It's
just like this sort of lingering of like we need these things in our past, like these are so like we can't kind of move on to.
Yeah, you can't just let something lie. Like I think it's always that struggle with maybe it's more in the sciences. It's like you just can't let something go. Like because you have the capability to do something, you feel the compulsion to do that thing. It's like, well, we have the technology now to like do these cool things, therefore we must do those cool things. And there's back and forth with that, but like I think that's going to be the conversation going forward, like especially with using AI generated voice based on the voice actors. And so you could see where like, James Earl Jones continues to voice Darth Vader through a bunch of different, animated shows and so on and so forth. But, it's going to be one of those things that I think there's going to be a lot more conversation about it going forward.
And like, I think sort of where this is leading is like, eventually, like, like all the MCU or whatever the big franchise is, like part of their contract will be like go in this dark room and like just say words for like the next 4 days, and like so that maybe in 20 years we can like do some multiverse story where he comes back and he's like interacting with like the younger the cast when they were young, or like, is this going to become sort of this thing? Hey, opens doors, also kind of weird, and sort of I think touches on the nostalgia and some of that.
And we can maybe do a whole segment on like AI and creativity, because I think that is, I mean, we've seen it with like a DALL-E AI art generator. There's a lot of like just interesting things happening now with AI and art. And so that, we can save that for another day. But that is what's coming
It
slash
is-
here.
It is going to take over the world at some point. We were going to talk about Avatar. I think we'll leave that maybe for next week. Kind of get into some of that. There's been a lot of discussion about that movie and kind of what place role it has in pop culture. So maybe we'll touch on that next live stream. But I'm just giddy. I want to get to the next segment of the show because it's all about me. So that's what the kind of thing I like. Our next segment we have Host Corner. So I thought, as I about to head over to this to the studio to do the live stream, and remembered, hey, it's my week to do Host Corner. So I tried to just find something on the surface to share with you guys that is important to me. That hey, maybe I'll switch it up and not do a metal album this time. Although there is some adjacent metal albums that relate to this and some bands, but share maybe my favorite book. Obviously, Lord of the Rings is it's a category unto itself. It's over here. It's separate. But kind of that aside, David Copperfield from Charles Dickens. Despite being like an English major in college, I came to Dickens late in my life. Only kind of in the last 3 or 4 years have I kind of at least start working through more specifically beyond A Christmas Carol. And all the books are great. I've read all of his novels. I'm kind of sad that I've read them all and there's no more. And I think David Copperfield's probably my favorite one. It's the most relatable. I think to me it was the one that I think is the most like autobiographical for Dickens himself, following like the life of a young writer. It's hilarious. It's engaging. It definitely holds up. And I think a lot of people, myself included, when they want to I should read at least one Dickens book in my life just so I can say, feel sophisticated. I think most people start at A Tale of Two Cities, because that's the one that we all know, which really is not the best starting point. It's almost the least like the rest of his books. It's kind of more historical, less kind of witty and fun. And so I think that maybe that turns people off. So if you've never checked out a Dickens book, again, audiobooks for Dickens, absolutely also a way to go. Just some of if you're not used to the British way of speaking and some of the humor and stuff that brings out, maybe start with an audiobook, start with David Copperfield, and just feel a little more cultured, enjoy some old stuff. But are you a Dickens guy at all?
I actually read Tale of Two Cities.
Oh, so you are
not that long ago, and I really enjoyed that. I thought it was great. I have not read Copperfield, so maybe I will pick that one up next time.
Yeah, and they did release a movie of David Copperfield a while ago.
Oh, yeah.
It was fine.
Did you review that one?
I did do a review.
Yeah.
But it doesn't really capture the full emotional range and stuff of the book. And again, people kind of forget Dickens. He's a believer. He's a Christian. Some of his theology and stuff is very much centered in justice and the poor and kind of work stuff. Maybe more than we would think of a Georgia Baptist preacher kind of thing. But
yeah.
Faith and religion very much plays a part in that, and but we never really include him often in when we talk about kind of Christian authors and Christian people. So as Christians, I think his books are very edifying. I recommend all of them. But speaking of things made by Christians, maybe made for Christians, things that people ignore and don't always check out like they should, faith-based films. So this is kind of our main conversation, and kind of I guess what sparked this for me is Father Stu. The Mark Wahlberg kind of biopic of Stuart Long, who was a true story of a boxer that kind of down on his luck and became a priest and then suffered from a muscle degenerative disorder and that ended up taking his life. This is the story, kind of telling that story with Wahlberg in the central role, kind of a passion project. I think he even wrote the check for most of the budget for this. I think it came out in April. Does that sound right? I think around Easter time.
Sounds about right. Yeah.
In theaters, so it's done its theatrical run. It did okay, modestly good at the box office, but it's having a second life on streaming. So this, I don't know if it still is. I think it's still in the top 5 today, but at least a couple days ago, it kind of rose all the way to the #1 movie on Netflix.
Yeah.
Which is just sort of a surprise. I remember scrolling through and seeing that when my wife was trying to find a different show. Not the kind of film you expect necessarily to, and even if you look at some of the other films and stuff that were around that, it stands out as a unique thing. It is a faith-based film, although maybe a bit of an unconventional one. So I thought we could get into that a little bit of sort of what is the future of faith-based films? What do we do? Is there any lessons we can learn just from sort of this second life digital success of Father Stu? Obviously, Father Stu is doing things very different than some other films, and I will in a second. Maybe I'm trying to think of I think there's different genres of these sort of films. But what are your initial takeaways from this? Is it surprising? Are you excited by this? Or
yeah, I mean, I think it's a little bit surprising, and I think it is exciting to see movies with like a wholesome message sort of break through some of that glass ceiling, as it were, for the quote unquote faith-based films. And I think it also perhaps shows a bit of a roadmap or one way in which faith-based films can have an impact. And again, this is a movie, again, having not seen it myself. I think it's a movie that it's gonna be slightly different than, let's say, anything coming out of, what is it, Sherwood, that does like all the sort of made for Sunday school viewing kind of faith-based films that we sort of jab at a bit.
This is definitely not. This is not like a, like show this in your Sunday school class kind of movie. Like, again, I missed it. I didn't do a review. Someone else wrote the original review for us. But I did check this movie out yesterday because I saw it on there and I was curious. And I had wanted to check it out. But this is a rated R movie. A lot of profanity. Not really any other content like sexual or even violence or anything. But definitely a lot of profanity. Kind of trying to be authentic, I think, to who this character was, and it was, as Wahlberg kind of I think shared in an interview, like being very honest about like kind of his like before conversion years, so that he could also be honest about just sort of how transformed.
Well, and I think that perhaps that's the main ingredient that is missing in a lot of other faith-based films is that character arc. Like it's more of a flat line, it seems like, in most faith-based films. It's like they were, maybe they didn't pray as much as they should have, but by the end of it, they prayed a lot more, and like they were pretty much good throughout, and then God did amazing things in the end, and isn't it lovely? And we're all Christians now. Whereas it sounds like this was a pretty rotten guy to begin with, but God's grace transformed him into something that he would have never become on his own. And I think that, to me at least, is the more compelling story of the gospel and story of grace. And again, I think the maybe the issue that people might have with it is like, but it's like the rating, or like, it's a bit more icky, and it's not fit for our youth group on Wednesday nights, or I don't know. Like, I think hopefully this shows that you can make faith-based movies that can have an impact outside the church. And I think that's what, at least in my mind, that's what this shows.
Yeah, because that's kind of what I wanted to for us to get into, because I think there is we talk about like faith-based films, and that can mean a lot of different things, although I do think typically what we would think of is sort of in a narrow sense. So I was trying to you guys let me know if I missed any on the list. I was trying to think of like the types of like sort of faith-based films, sort of the broad categories that these sort of fall into. The first one that I came up, the alternative ones, which is these are the most cringeworthy of all of them. Hey, kids in the world like that Finding Nemo, Finding Dory movie. Well, have they checked out Finding Jesus? Safe and fun for the whole family.
Who knew he was in the bottom of the ocean?
Yeah, there he is. So again, this is the same category as like the high school or Sunday school musical, and just sort of the like, or even like the baptized Hamilton show. Theatrical ones. So again, these ones I think are the worst manifestation of it. The other one, kind of the literally the Bible kind of genre. This is like I was thinking of like The Chosen, or like the Jesus movie, or the Son of God, or what was there was another like Bible TV show that came out a while ago.
Wasn't there one on Judas, or is that not? That was a totally like Hollywoodized version. Or there was Noah.
Noah, without the literal part in that one, but stories that tell of the Bible. I think there's like a David and Goliath one. There's like the Apostle Paul movie. I think where Gimli is the actors plays Paul. So you have those ones. One I called the Sunday school ones, and I don't necessarily mean that entirely as like a
pejorative.
Yeah, in a negative sense. But it's something like War Room, and I know that there's another kind of similar ones like this. And I just think of these as movies that like they start with like a message, and like it's very much to like teach sort of a spiritual truth, and it's design, like they market it a lot for like to be in churches and to
Yeah,
be
there's like
for the whole
curriculum
family.
that comes along
Curriculum
with it. Yeah.
that goes with it. Very kind of focused on that. The other one, kind of based on a true story about Christian, that's kind of what Father Stu is hey, tell a story about a disciple or someone that or a saint. That's kind of in the Shia LaBeouf, what his movie coming up will be about. And then maybe like the more like raw, like I don't like using the word mature 'cause I think that comes across wrong, but like the more ambiguous ones like Silence, which I actually haven't seen, and I just keep hearing it's one of those movies that like I should see, and
Yeah, I
for
know.
what I do, I should have
Same.
seen it.
Yeah.
I don't. At some point, I do need to check it out. And then maybe the last category, which I sort of was thinking of, sort of might be called like faith-based films, are more like the ones that have like good spiritual Christian themes, but they're not really Christian, and like they're not even made by Christians, and like Signs. There's probably better examples. That's just the only one that I came up with, where it's like this is a movie about aliens, and like the director I don't think is like a believer, but like it deals with a lot of like themes of like providence and like that there is a purpose, and like Mel Gibson's character at the end is like a priest that lost his faith, and at the end of the movie he sort of he's like reaffirms like very much like this could work as a if this was made by
lots of sermon illustrations.
Yeah, you can use it for the sermon illustrations. So those are kind of the I guess the main categories. Maybe I missed some. So it is somewhat diverse. Although I think most of like the general discussion ends up being more on like the Sunday school type films, or like the alternate, like the God's Not Dead type movies, which are kind of very much like, I don't know, like kind of preaching to the choir a bit, and like kind of even the way they market these shows is very much like what they're not. Like this is not profane like the world. This is very safe. This is wholesome. Yeah, it's more of like an escape rather than something kind of raw. So I don't know. In those, like, what do you have anything from that? Like the categories, or like is it?
No, I mean I think that's a pretty good categorization, and I think that's a good way also to just kind of think about faith-based movies, because I do think when we say faith-based, it's sort of a shorthand for the like Sunday school variety, and I think typically it is sort of used as like, if you say it's a faith-based film, it's like it's sort of shorthand for saying, it falls in the line of like War Room or Facing the Giants or any of these that are sort of very much like, they're PG, it's safe, there's no real character arc, it's somewhat cheesy, and so I think having the categories broken down like this, I think is helpful to think sort of outside that box of like faith-based that we tend to put faith-based in, and I think it can be good, and I think that's where I think you maybe mentioned this already, but where I think streaming can kind of be an interesting thing, and maybe a place for some more, I don't know, experimental faith-based movies.
Because like things like Father Stu, and again I don't know like the numbers. Maybe it was just like a little blip when it first came on, and then it's not going to be successful. I don't know like all the the behind the scenes mechanics of that, but just that did stand out to me. This idea that like, because you see like wider culture, there's a lot of talk that like, okay, like theaters now sort of become like the very kind of undemanding, crowd pleasing like comic book movie type spectacles. Yeah. And like streaming's now become more of like, hey, if you want to get more of like a more gritty or nuanced or like experimental or like, less of like the popcorn flick, like now that's on streaming. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of thing like, is there an equivalent in that for faith-based films where like, because I think like the problem with like going for the theatrical stuff is like you need to make the money back, like you need the church crowd, like the Sunday morning crowd to all flock to the theater, and to do that, like you gotta you gotta meet their expectations, and like please, and it has to be safe. It has to be, you can't have profanity, you can't explore maybe some more gritty issues, and so you end up kind of getting a lot of the same types of faith-based films, which I just think is almost exclusively viewed by Christians. Like, and it's a lot of them just sort of, it's almost like this duty to like, this is one of our movies, we need more of these, so we need to go to the theater because it's not like that awful Hollywood, rather than just like, hey, this is a really compelling story that I would go see anyways, and it just happens to explore.
Yeah, I mean, do you see this sort of being the parallel of sort of what the big Hollywood studios are doing? It's like they have their blockbusters that like preaches to their choir, like the 100th iteration of Marvel Universe movie, so that they can then fund these little indie flicks that don't make the money back, but are really interesting and compelling. Like, you know, the Christian version is like you make the sort of Sunday school flick that like pleases everybody in the church, so that they can then start to make some movies that are a little like maybe more nuanced or just not so much for the main crowd. Like, do you see that happening? Do you think that'll be sort of the way forward for some of these,
Yeah, I don't know.
say, Christian studios? Or
Because I think even like, cause one of the things I think one of the down or like the tendencies we have is like this very like reactionary of like anytime something's successful, like that becomes the template. Like,
yeah,
so some of these like very safe kind of Christian movies like that become this like surprise box office hit. And like now that's the template, and that's, you know, obviously people want these kind of movies, so we need to only make these kind of movies. And kind of like the reverse is like, because like something like this is like a gritty R-rated faith-based film, like because it kind of pops on Netflix, then there's like, see, all faith-based movies need to be gritty and dark and have profanity and like
yeah,
I think there's room for like a wide range of just stories. Like I think there's room for Sunday school stories. There's not room for the alternatives, but for all the other categories, I think there is room. And I think again, I think some of the like even a streaming thing, it still needs to be successful. Like, it still needs to have value to like draw people in, and you know, it's not necessarily just like, well, I just, you know, make it. You don't need to worry about box office and success. Just make these weird, strange, religious movies. Like obviously, it needs to like have a hook. But there was something refreshing about watching Father Stew, that because even like beyond this, like the profanity and some of that, which I think people will have mixed feelings on, like it's just the story itself is it's more nuanced. Like
yeah,
it doesn't come across. You don't get sort of the like, you know, and the moral of the story is, you know, this.
Yeah.
No, now check out our curriculum, and it gets. Which maybe there is curriculum, I don't know, but like it is very much like he's just struggling with this disease, and he's angry at God, and he's trying to figure it out, and like you kind of see him working through that, and it's more of like, it's less of like this is the truth about the world and Christianity, and it's more like this is how he experienced this situation and how that kind of made an impact. Monty in the chat says, any thoughts on the Terrence Malick films? Where do they fall? Hidden Life, Tree of Life. I haven't seen many of his films. I saw Tree of Life. I actually watched that in a PhD film class. That was one of our assignments, like to watch that and try and understand that, you know, dig deep into it. And again, that is, I think, maybe not as like, well, I guess he's somewhat mainstream, but like, it is more of like very experimental. Like it's not it's not a blockbuster kind of like, it was all go watch Tree of Life. Like it's a weird film, but I remember watching that and thinking like, this movie has made me think more. Like it's not just sort of like, you know, touching the itch, scratching the itch of like, oh, now I feel good about being a Christian. Like it's also like making you think and like wrestle with stuff.
And I think his films are also like quite a bit more like what I think you would describe as cinematic as well. Like it's very like visual.
It's like high art.
Yeah. It's like, I mean, it's sort of like the like Roger Deakins-esque, maybe not that, but like, yeah, high art, I think would be.
Like a lot of like visual storytelling rather than just like,
yeah.
You know, we need a character to say, you know, to give the ABCs of becoming a Christian by Act 3, which again, that's fine to have that in movies. But I think there is, and I think even the fact that like something like Father Stew has made Christians like a lot of Christians like uncomfortable with profanity. Like I think even just that alone, there's stuff to like to just process. Of, like, why like we sort of want the transformation, and we want to like just to like impact the world, but like we're very reluctant to like just sort of see that honestly, or like see sin, or like hear things that make us uncomfortable. So I don't know. I think there is a place for it. I don't think it'll be for everyone, but I do think kind of the future, I guess, of faith-based films is that it's like diverse. Like just tell good stories, focus on different things. Don't feel like we need to. It either has to have Jesus or like an evangelistic message, or like just tell good stories, tell captivating stories. And I think streaming will even allow those stories to kind of reach a bigger audience that maybe just wouldn't feel comfortable going to one of the the next faith-based film. And
I think that's the thing. It's like these like Father Stew is reaching an audience that these other sort of Sunday school faith-based films simply won't ever reach. And I think that's something to keep in mind when you're evaluating, the pros and cons of these types of faith-based films.
Yeah, I think even like some of like the scores and like the cinema scores and stuff from some of the other like theatrical ones very much make it clear that like this is predominantly, like I would say probably 98% church Christians going
Yeah.
to these movies, hearing this powerful message. But I think something like this is just a little bit more of like kind of meet you in the middle and just sort of tell a more authentic story. But hey, let us know what you guys think. What is the future of faith-based films? Is there anything we can take away from Father Stu? Is there things that maybe do you think it's leading us in the wrong direction? Do you think there is more opportunities with streaming? Whatever it may be, I think there's going to be a lot more sort of this whole industry in films. I think the church and Christians are getting more involved than ever. So I think these conversations will need to happen as we figure out kind of what we do with this and how we kind of process this. But kind of final thoughts here for our episode. A couple things to kind of let you guys be aware of if you haven't checked out. This thing's going on in the Collision verse. There's an article, if you missed it, on the Little Demon controversy that we posted, the show about the Antichrist, that's sort of the protagonist, and it's this cartoon, it's this bizarre kind of thing. I kind of looked into that story and tried to kind of get beneath like the sensationalism of like all the headlines, saying what do we do about shows like this as Christians? So check that out on the collision.org. And also movie reviews. Hasn't been a whole lot of movies lately. I think maybe next week is the Lyle Crocodile, or some singing crocodile movie that my kids really want to see. And I think Steven in the back has been just counting down the days for that one. I think it's based on a book or something. So stay tuned for that. But ones that we have done lately, Pinocchio, not a good movie, but hey, it's on Disney Plus, so check it out and check out my review because it is a good review. And then The Woman King, a lot of controversies about it. I kind of get into some of that. Obviously, I take a positive approach. I thought it was a good movie, but also sort of get into some of like the themes and stuff going on in that movie. So if you haven't checked those out, check that out. But anything else kind of going on?
Well, I'll just end with a quote from
here we go.
James Baldwin. Children have never been good at listening to their elders, but they have never failed to imitate them. So if you're a parent or uncle or whatever, then just know that kids will imitate you, but maybe won't do what you tell them to, which is definitely true in my life.
Yeah, or if you're just an old person, then keep that wise words of Sam in mind and percolating all week. I want to thank you guys for joining us. Thanks our crew for working their magic behind the scenes. Encourage you guys, actually, something else that I meant to mention earlier, which maybe we haven't officially decided on.
Oh, yeah.
Live streams, our Tuesday live streams, I think will become Wednesday live streams. It just makes it easier on my schedule and all of our schedules. So we'll post some stuff to remind you about that. So don't join us next Tuesday at noon because we won't be here. But join us next Wednesday at noon, and we will be here for another live stream to get into more conversations. But thanks for joining us, guys. Stay safe and continue to collide with your world for Christ.